Hello and welcome. In this episode, we're going to be primarily focused on BMW's Vario cases, the side cases and the top box that has been fitted to a whole range of BMW bikes for quite some years, including the early R1200 GS, which is one of these, from 2004 through to 2012. This bike was referred to as a K25, so the cases that fit this bike are different because they've got the exhaust on the other side of the bike, so they don't physically move from bike to bike, but the mechanisms inside are very similar. So these cases, they have two main problems. What I'm going to do in this video, it is going to be quite long, and I'll put up some chapters up here on your right hand side so that you can go to the section that you want, because it is going to be a long video, because I'm going to show you the tools that you need. I'm going to show you the problems, how to fix it, how to dismantle them, the lubrication that you need to do, and give you some tips and hints, because I've done several of these, of how to get them working and functioning correctly. Now, your cases should operate with just fingers like this. You should be able to grab your bar, swivel it around without any excess pressure to expand your case, and the same returning it. 2 fingers, gentle pressure. That's it. That's all you need to be able to do to operate that case. Now, if yours takes a good handful and you have to put some effort into it, it's time for some maintenance. And yes, they do need a bit of maintenance. So that's what I'm going to be showing you partly today. And that's what the bulk of the video is going to be: dismantling them, showing you how to lubricate and sorting out the problems. Now, what you can also see on this case and on the one on the floor, I have added some new graphics. And that's because when I bought these cases, they only cost me €350. They were in a pretty poor condition. The physical hardware was fine, so the hangers and the connection points, everything was okay, but these were looking quite tired and it looked like they'd had quite a hard life. So I decided these would be a brilliant pair of cases to show you what you can actually do, not only with sorting out the problems, the lubrication problems and the mechanisms inside, but also how you can, with some very simple products, get your cases, as you can see from both of these, looking almost like new. They're not the same, but for €350, that is a big saving over the £1,000 you'd need to pay for a new set. Now, graphics. There are lots of different graphics that you can buy for your motorbikes, your cases, your top box, and all over your motorbike. And most of them are those smooth, glossy, shiny surface graphics, and they do look very good, but they don't provide any real protection for your cases. And these ones are from a company called UniRacing. Now, if you go back to the very early videos I did with the GS, you'll find that I installed one of these graphics on the transmission shaft in week 1, because my boots are a size 48 and my left foot was already scratching that transmission tunnel. So I did quite a lot of research 2.5 years ago to find out what was the best material for graphics to be made from to give protection, and I never made a video about it. So UniRacing have been good. They've sent me some graphics. There's this GS style, there's the Compass style, and when we get to that section, I'll show you exactly how to install them, because you do need to pay attention to installing the graphics. And I've got a couple of tests using a screwdriver, scraping them, and you just don't see any marks. And if I did that on a normal glossy graphic, they'd be buggered and scratched in a couple of minutes. So that's the focus of our episode. However, 2 more things. So one, I need to explain what this bike is doing in the garage. But first, the new 2025 GSA is coming to the channel. It's a fully spec'd trophy version. It does have BMW's new ASA system, the automated shift assist system, which I'm really excited to test, and I'm looking forward to having it on the channel. It's going to be here for a couple of months. The owner of that particular bike has very graciously allowed me to do some modifications and some updates and fit some graphics to that bike. So there is a lot to come later in the season. But this brings us on to this one. So when we talked about this new GSA, this fully spec one that's coming, it is just a couple of £100 short of £30,000, 30 grand. In euro, that's about 32,000, and in dollars, it's about $29,000-$30,000. It's a huge amount of money to spend on an adventure motorbike. So what I thought was, in the meantime, while I'm waiting for that bike to arrive, what could I get that represents value for money? So initially I started looking at half the price, around 12 to 15,000, and then I really figured out quite quickly that still doesn't represent a budget that a lot of people can afford. That's still a big chunk of money. So you'd be really surprised to find out that this one here, You can get one of these for about £5,000, €5,000, £5,000, $5,000, plus or take a little bit depending on the country and their availability. This bike is a 2010. It was known internally by BMW as the TU bike, which stands for Technical Update. Because this bike has the twin cam head. It's got lots of other refinements. So we've got a couple of episodes about this bike. The owner of this one, Russell, thank you very much for letting me have it. I've got this for a couple of months. We're going to be doing some modifications, some updates and some graphics on this bike to add a new lease of life, just to show you what you can do with a £5,000 bike. This has got 50,000 miles on the clock and it runs like a dream. I mean, both bikes aren't very clean at the moment because I've been out doing road testing and preparing for this series. Anyway, let's move on with the Vario cases. So let's get started with these cases. Now, it's important to understand whether you have a K25 or a K50, the mechanisms inside are very, very similar. And now the first thing you should do before you start taking your cases apart is to clean them thoroughly. I did film my whole process of cleaning, but I decided because the video is already really long that it was pointless showing you how to clean cases. Simply put, you're going to need warm soapy water. You're going to need some kind of detergent to get that filth off both of the inside and the outside. And importantly, what you're going to need to do is get into this gap, this joining gap between the two halves. So if your cases will expand them to their maximum and then get in there with that warm soapy water with some detergent, let it soak for 20 minutes and then you're going to wash it out with cold water at hose pipe pressure. You're definitely not going to use a pressure washer because that will damage the surface of the plastic and you're liable to damage the mechanism inside and the rubber seals. So don't do that. And then once you've cleaned it thoroughly, you're going to turn the case over so that the metal's facing upwards and then let that drain and dry. It'll probably take about a day for those cases somewhere warm, not in the sunshine. The sunshine with the detergent you've put on there will fade that plastic and we're going to bring that plastic back to life later on. But that's the first step. Now you might well find that just by thoroughly cleaning them, there's going to be so much debris and dust and grit that's going to come out that actually your cases might not need any more attention. They may then start to operate and function okay. But remember what I showed you earlier on, what we're really looking for is a two-fingered operation of that bar, nice and easy, and that is how smooth and easy you should be able to operate that bar. Now if it's not like that, we need to do the next step. So let's move on to the next section and I'll show you what you need to do. So once you've thoroughly cleaned your cases and they've had a day to dry, they'll probably look something like this. Now don't worry if the case is actually looking worse than it did when you started. Quite often you'll see lots of grey areas on the black plastic. Don't worry, we are going to sort that out when we get round to the cosmetic section and it will look completely different when we're finished. So at this point you just have to decide whether you want to go ahead and take the case further apart to see if we can improve the movement and that mechanism inside. So once we've given the case a thorough clean, as I've showed you earlier on, a lot of people will find that that's enough and it's made an improvement because it has, or it will have done, when we turn it around, it would have removed an awful lot of dirt and grit that lives underneath this gap between these two halves. However, what we're going to do, we're going to take ours apart, but this is where you would check. So the important thing to do at this point before you move on is have a look at this bar here, and I'll try and turn it around so that you can see this bar here, this adjustment bar, it needs to be parallel, in other words, in line with the case. If it isn't, and it is in fact cockeyed, it will be really obvious because the bar will be further forward and further back at the bottom, or it will be the other way around and it will look like it's bent. Now, if yours is like that, that's in a way fairly good news because it tells us what the problem is and it is relatively easy to rectify. Now the problem is once the gap between those two halves gets full of dirt and grit, it becomes very hard to operate this sliding mechanism. And what sometimes people do, instead of grabbing the handle here in the middle, which is where you should be using it, which then equalizes the force between the gears on the right and the gears on the left, they sometimes grab hold of it from the side. Maybe they've been on a long journey and they're very tired, and then they yank it down on one one side, and what happens is inside these closed cases, which we can take apart and have a look at, there are in fact some gears, and what sometimes happens is it clicks. It'll jump one cog on one side, and then this bar will be cockeyed. In other words, it won't be parallel to the rest of the case. So the other way you can tell is once you've opened it fully, at that last little bit at the bottom, both sides of the handle should clip in place nice and easily. And if you've got one handle or one side of the handle that is slightly sticking out, that means that one of those gears on the left or the right has jumped place, and we need to sort it out. So that's the first step. If you're happy with the movement now and your case moves much more freely, you can skip the next phase and move on to the cosmetic section of this video. But we're going to move on. So the first step in separating the two halves of the sliding case is to remove the handle. Now you're going to need a screwdriver. It's a Phillips number 2. Don't try to use the other sizes because you might round them off. We're going to take this screw out of here, this screw out of here. We're going to start with the lever in the middle position like so and take the handle out. So let me take that off first. So now with the handle safely removed, we can move on to the next part. Now on the sides, there are 1, 2, and there are 2 more on this side, another 2 here. Again, these are Phillips number 2. We need to remove those screws, and that will allow us to separate the case to move on to the next part. So let me take those 4 screws out and show you the next step. So we got the 4 screws removed. Just bear in mind that the screws are the same length, but the washer size is different. And what we've got here, the large washers actually hold these straps in place on the bottom. So both the large washers and the screws go to the bottom and the smaller ones go to the top. Let's move on. So this next step can be a little fiddly. Just take your time, don't rush. The outer case is now able to come completely off. And once we've got these off, it does in fact look like that this side, this mechanism on the side, which I'll show you in a moment, has become loose internally at the bottom of the case, but we can fix that as we go along. But what we need to do, we need to slide this outer case completely off. And we can start by going round and just slowly pushing around the edges, and these corners here, they just need a little lift with your finger like so in each corner, that, and then the outer case comes completely off like that. I'll move that out the way for the moment, and then we're left with the inner part. Now what you can probably see here, this on the right hand side is fairly sturdily mounted, but for some reason on this left hand side, look at that, it's not very tight. So that's probably one of the problems with this particular case, and we will get round to doing this in a moment. What we're going to need to do is to take off this mechanism on the top. It's held in with these TX40 bolts, and then we can get to these smaller TX bolts, which then, as you might just be able to see inside, there's 1, 2, 3, and we can then do that up and stop that waggling around, and we can also at the same time check the other side. Now, once we got the case off, then you'll be able to see whether or not your cleaning has been very thorough. And I hate to say it, but mine's not been that good from the look of it. There is quite a lot of dirt and grit still around that seal all the way around. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a damp cloth, and then we're going to thoroughly clean all this edge, turn it around, all this edge here, that rubber seal, and this edge here. Now if your case is really very, very badly scraped, as this one is just a little bit, it's actually not too bad. You could take something like 1500 or 2000 grit sandpaper and very, very carefully take those really rough edges off, but actually just a little bit of scuffing like that, looking at that all the way around, that really isn't too bad. That's what I'd expect to see. So I'll clean that up. I'm also going to do, if I move that out the way, what we're also going to do while we're here, now we've got the outer edge off, I'm going to get a rag and a cloth with a screwdriver and go around the inside here and thoroughly clean that out, to get the dust and the grit and the dirt that's stuck in there that we didn't get out from the washing, and then we can have a look at that mechanism that's loose. Let's move on. So to resolve this loose mechanism on the side here, we are going to have to take a section off on the back, and I have pre-loosened all of the 9 bolts, but just want to show you the nuts themselves. They always look like they're fitted in correctly. They look like they should somehow fit that way, but if I move the case, you can in fact see the cutout for the nuts on the inside. So then if we carefully turn it over like so, these are the TX40. There are 9 of them. You're not going to undo these 2 here, just these ones around the outside. Leave them all in there because they're different sizes and different lengths, and then just lift that mechanism off with the control rod, which we're going to put back later on, and put that to one side so that the bolts don't fall out. Now, what is actually very interesting is the batch and the manufacturing date inside this one, and that says the 30th September 2015, batch 31. So these cases are in fact 9 years old at the moment in 2024. Now that we've took that outer cover off, we can now see all of the bolts, 1, 2, 3, and they are in fact all very loose. They're TX20. I'm going to take those bolts out. So now that we've removed the mechanism that was loose on one side of the case, you can see these are the 3 mounting points. So these are TX20. Now the mechanism itself is relatively straightforward, and we can't really get this wrong, and it is very easy to rectify if you do have a problem with this cog here jumping a tooth and you've got that handle that's out of place. So what I'm going to do, this cog here, if I turn it around, this is attached to the mechanism that attaches to the handle. Now if I place a screwdriver in the top there, we can see that if I rotate it 90 degrees to the left or 180 degrees the other way, this is the operation of the mechanism inside. Now if I move it all the way over to the right hand side, it is actually quite hard to show this on camera, but I will take some pictures. There are 4 parts, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a transfer cog. This doesn't have any markings on it, and it doesn't matter which way in terms of its position it goes in. But this center one here actually has a line marked on it. So does this one here, and so does this one here. And all you're looking for is to, if your handle is cockeyed and out of shape, it'll be one of these cogs that has moved and jumped a tooth. And we do have a screw here that we can remove so that we can adjust this if we need to. And if we turn it around, we've got these 2 screws on the rear. And if I swivel those out the way, we've got our 10mm nuts. So we can, in fact, if it's one cog on the left or the one on the right, we can unscrew the nut on the bolt on the back and use a 10mm spanner, and then we can adjust that cog. Now, what we're looking for in terms of alignment is these mechanisms, these 2 cogs, just to make it simpler to explain. They will in fact be vertical like this. You'll find this center mark, and I'll put a picture up so you can see it much better. And there is a mark here and a mark there, and they want to be in a perfect line. And if your handle is out of sync, it'll be one of those that doesn't line up. So that's the mechanism. Now, while we've got it apart and we have inspected it, you can put a very small amount of oil, as I have on this cog here. You can also, if I tilt it ever so slightly, you might just be able to see the rear surface. Whoops, I'll move my finger. The rear surface down there, I've dropped a drop of oil in there too. And of course you can lubricate with just literally 1 drop of oil on these mechanisms, and I'll show you these in a moment when we refit the case. Just bear in mind, don't be tempted to do these up tight with a screwdriver. So at the moment, these are actually quite loose, and this is what they should be. They should move freely like so. But if you're tempted to do this up, and if I do that just, or not even a 1/12 of a turn, that is then pretty solid, and it makes it harder for the mechanism to work. So you want to make sure, if you are adjusting these and checking their tension, that you want them not quite fully tight, so that this mechanism on the side is free to move. So now you've looked at the cog mechanism on one of the sides inside the case, I thought I would show you this last part. Now we had to remove this to get to those 3 screws. Now this is in fact, if you look here and here, this is the locking mechanism that keeps your Vario bag in place once these mounting points have hooked over on the side of your GS. Now if we spin it around inside, we have got some points that we can lubricate. So we've got these 2 metal shafts on the right and the 2 metal shafts on the left, and if I try and hold that steady, you can see the mechanisms this one here and this one here. Just watch those carefully, sliding left and right, left and right. So all I've done is I've placed a small amount of grease on these shafts and then work this mechanism backwards and forwards to make sure it's nice and free. I've also checked that all the rest of the screws are nice and tight, which they are. This mechanism is also free, and so is the release mechanism. So when the lever is firmly shut like so, the mechanism itself, you just turn and that lever pops up. So I've just made sure everything's working, and I've put a little bit of grease on all those movement points. So now we can go back to reassembling this using the 9 bolts that we removed. 7 of them are the same length and 2 of them are actually quite short, and they're these bottom 2 here, but that's really quite obvious when we go to put this back onto the case. Let's move forward. So now that we've got both of these side mechanisms back in, they're aligned correctly, and we've done some lubrication. We've also remounted the mechanism on the rear. We've got our lubrication done in there. We can move on to the next phase. Now, this might be a bit controversial, but a lot of people, especially on the forums, say that you should silicone this rubber seal all the way around when reassembling. However, for me, that is a definite don't do, because if we add any kind of grease, whether it's silicone or any other kind of grease, there is still going to be dirt, dust, and all kinds of debris getting in between that gap. And all that's going to happen is that dirt, that dust, that debris is going to stick to the grease, and ultimately we're going to end up with more problems. We're going to be back to where we started. So my advice is not to do it. There is a different solution. What we're going to use is some vinyl rubber care. We are going to spray it onto a soft rag, and we're not going to spray it onto the case because it will make a mess everywhere. And then what we're going to do, we're going to work our way around this here, that seal and that edge. Now you can probably just make out on the camera, there are these ridges, and that is as far as we're going to go with this process. Slowly spraying more onto the rag, working our way around, and then what this will do, it takes some time to work in. We're going to have to move in circles. We want to make sure that that rubber seal on the inside and the outside is done. So let me just explain what we're doing here. When this dries, which takes about an hour, it leaves a very smooth, frictionless surface, which is what we want to have for our case sides sliding together. And I definitely don't put any kind of lubricant on here. And it's very hard to show you this on the video, but if I was to feel this clean rubber with my hands like so, and then feel this rubber up here that we've only just put a little bit of this vinyl care on, it is much smoother. There is much less friction, and that's what we're going to want. We definitely don't want grease on here. So we're going to work our way all the way around the edge. We're going to do the rest of the box when we get to the cosmetic section, but let's do this edge first. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do have some very rough surfaces on this plastic edge where the case has been rubbing, you can of course use something like a 1500 or a 2000 grit sandpaper, but not do the whole thing. We're not trying to add more scratches. We're just trying to take those raised burrs all the way around, but this actually for 8 or 9 years is pretty good. So I'm going to go all the way around, and we'll then get to reassembling both halves. So now we've got both halves of our case ready to be reassembled. We've made sure that our rubber gasket is clean, and we've used the right products to get a nice friction-free surface on here. Couple of things to point out. First of all, this inner handle, this release handle, this needs to be vertical. And that's because in a moment we're going to be lining up the red handle from the outer part of the case onto this shaft here. So we need to line that up. So what I've also then done is it's important not at this point to install your handle, because as you can see, if we try to install the handle, what it does, it's pushing these outer parts further outwards to the case, which is going to make reassembly much more difficult. So we'll leave the handle to last. The reassembly is actually very, very easy, but to film it at the same time, I'm finding it a bit tricky. So we've got our case ready. Then we're going to go to our outer case. We need to make sure that this locking lever here is also open fully outwards, and then we're going to try and assemble it. So what I should do at this point is turn the case around to try and make it easy to follow. And these metal brackets, by the way, I've got both sides vertical. I'm going to point them inwards. And then the first thing that we need to make sure is that this part here, this red part here, that slides over the shaft, and providing the bottom is open and the top's open, it should go straight on with a little bit of wiggling. Okay, now the next part, trying to film this and show you, is not easy. So that's now located, and now all I'm going to do, I'm going to gently pull the inside towards me to let that rear case, that top case, fall down like so. This side's okay, and then gently, okay, this edge has dropped in already, and if I move to this side, this has started to drop in. Okay, so we're well on our way now. This is good. What we can then do, I can probably do the rest, although it's going to be difficult, from the side here. So these parts here on the inside, we just need to make sure that we push them outwards so that the outer case slides past, and then the same with the other side, like so. Again, trying to do this and film is tricky. Okay, so now that we've got the outer part sliding back over the inner, what we need to do is put these metal lugs back onto these plastic mounts. There's two on the left, there's two on the right, and they will, if I, again, I'm going to have to turn the camera, take a different screwdriver. These will gently, if I move these into position, like so, and hopefully you can see this. If I turn the handle, that's slid on. We're going to turn the case around. What we need to do is put the handle on so that we can press this case outwards. So let me move it around and get the handle ready. So it was actually much easier once I'd put the handle mechanism in so that I could have a balance from left to right. So at that point, when I was mounting these four locating brackets back on the sides, I put the handle in. So then all we've really then got to do is we can prop up the case a small amount and take the latches, put them back onto here. We're going to, don't forget, we're going to use the large washers on the bottom here, and then these two smaller washers with the screws are the same size on the top, and then we'll move forward. Let's have a look. So once we've got everything refitted, and we've refitted the bar with the two screws, one left and one right, you're probably going to find that everything now works much more smoothly, which was the whole object of the exercise before we started. So what we're going to do next, I'm going to we can just make sure now that our mechanisms work, which they do, which is fine. So nothing has changed, it's all working fine. We're going to expand the case out, and now we're going to start the rest of the cleaning process. Now we have cleaned the cases, so we're just going to move on. I'm then going to go around the whole case using this and the soft rag. Now this actually takes some time to go off, about an hour, and then it needs buffing, and I normally do each case 2 or 3 times, and then you get this really hard non-sticky surface, and it's quite hard. You don't get any residue on your fingers, but you need to leave time to let this dry in between. So I'm going to go all around the case. The only part of the case I'm not going to do, because we're going to cover that shortly, is this metal surface here, because we are going to be installing some new graphics from UniRacing so that we can get a nice new fresh look on our cases, and we are going to need to clean this before we actually put the graphics on. So I'll crack on with the rest of the polishing, and then I'll come back in a moment. So before I move on to show you how to successfully install these graphics from UniRacing, a couple of things to highlight. Now these cases are from the later bikes, so this is 2013 onwards up until the end of the 1250 range. Now it is important when you place your order to make sure that you order the graphic that has a small square in the center, whereby the BMW looks quite large inside that box, because that helps you identify the K50 series of cases. Now with the K25, the graphics are identical, apart from the fact that this box in here is much bigger. And it's a very easy spot, because when you look at the logo, although the logo emblem is the same size as it is on this, it is in a much bigger box, and so it looks smaller. So it's really obvious that the K25 is a much bigger square. So when you place your order, just bear that in mind. Now there are two primary styles that UniRacing have. This style up here, this is the compass style. This does not have the GS symbol in the bottom. It has the compass style, and this probably is my preference. They're both really nice, but to show you this, I've mounted the GS logos on one side and the compass logos on the other side. Installation, it's all about preparation and making sure that surface that we're going to stick those graphics to is absolutely spotlessly clean. You're going to use alcohol or isopropanol. You're going to do it twice. You're going to make sure that aluminium is completely clean. Now, as you're going to see in the video, one of these cases was really badly covered in tar. So I also used an aluminium cleaner first to go along and take as much of that tar. Some of those marks, which I thought were scratches, were in fact marks, actually came off. And it did make quite a bit of difference during the preparation. And I think it was the first case that I didn't have to do that on, because once I wiped it down, it looked pretty good. So you might need some metal polish to pre-treat the aluminium to get as much of that muck and tar and scratches off first. But then you are going to thoroughly clean them. You're also going to wash your hands and make sure you've got no oil on your fingertips, and then you can start the process. Now, the key thing with this is not to do it in the cold. The graphics need warmth, and ideally you should do this in your house, in your front room, because the graphics need to have that nice flexible movement while you're mounting them. So you need to be over 20 degrees in the house, and you can use a hairdryer to put some more warmth into the graphics, but just take your time and be careful. As you're about to see, it is very easy to do, and if you take your time, you won't have any air bubbles and you won't have any creases. Let's move on. So then we're going to move on to putting the graphics on the other case. Now this case, I don't know whether I can get that in the camera, and I'll show you the before pictures. This is actually quite badly scratched. It's got a couple of dents here and there all over it, and this is the worst one. So this will be very interesting to see how this one looks when we're finished. Now, before we start, there are a couple of things that I'm going to do in advance. Now the graphics themselves, as we saw from the earlier case, are going to cover this section here, 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 this bit here, and then the center part of this X that you can see on the case. What it's not going to cover is this raised 3D edge all the way around here, and there are in fact some scratches and some marks on here. So what I'm going to do first, before I do any preparation, I'm going to try and clean this aluminium section up and try and get it looking better. Now you can use Autosolve, that's also very good for aluminium. I'm going to use something called Mother's Magan aluminium cleaner, and I am going to go all the way around this section here and just try and bring back a little bit of shine, a little bit of luster, and try and get some of these marks off of here, these scratches, and then I'll come back and show you what we're going to do in terms of preparation. Now this really has actually had quite an effect on the condition of that aluminium panel underneath, and although my plan was to start with just this outer edge of this X that you can see in the center, I've actually gone over and done the whole case. So I'll just finish off what I'm doing, then I'll buff it up and then show you the difference that just this one step makes. So I am actually really quite surprised how much of a difference that aluminium polish has made to this aluminium panel. But actually it was worth the time doing the whole thing. Hands. Keeping our hands clean before we start this project is really important. So washing your hands thoroughly in warm, soapy water is really key so that we have a nice clean surface. Now the metal panel itself, I'm going to clean using alcohol pads. I'm going to use 2 of these. You can get them in your chemist, you can get them in hardware stores and your supermarkets. And we need to clean this surface utterly, totally, thoroughly with alcohol pads so that that graphic has plenty of clean surface to stick to. So now we've got our cleaning and preparation done, our hands are clean, we haven't got oil on our fingers, we've washed them in warm soapy water, we're ready to proceed with the graphics. So I've opened the pack and I've laid the graphics out roughly where they're going to sit on the case. This is just rough, but what we're going to start with, we're going to start with the center cross. Now this is probably the most important one. The most difficult ones are these side ones, but this is the one that's most important because we need to get this aligned accurately. Now the common mistake what a lot of people make is that they start on one of these corners and then they start to lay the graphic down and they work their way across. The problem with that is if you have a tiny error on this side here, by the time we get over here, the error can be huge and the graphic can actually be completely in the wrong place. So what I found over the years, by far the best way to start is in the center here, where this BMW logo is. And to achieve that, what we're going to do, we're going to tear a strip off here and a strip off there so that we then have a chance to have several goes at mounting this and then just gently pushing this down and making sure that these corners are exactly aligned. So this is really quite straightforward. The backing paper does come off quite easily. We just have to be careful. Also bear in mind the temperature needs to be relatively warm. You can't be doing this in the winter because the graphic itself won't have any flexibility. So we're just going to tear a section off like that. We'll do the same on the other side. And what this does, that gives us the ability to reposition the graphic and get it absolutely perfect before we start taking off the rest of the backing paper. Now, this is where we're touching this with our fingers, so it is actually important that we have thoroughly cleaned our hands. It doesn't have to be perfect, something like that. Now then we can move on. Now we need to make sure we get this the right way up, so the color and the black goes to the top. And what we can then do, because we've taken the backing paper off, we can very easily pick this up and move it and get this position absolutely perfect. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lean in front of the camera in a moment. So I'm happy with the positioning now of the center graphic, and all I'm going to do, where I've taken off those two strips of backing paper in the middle section here, I'm just gently going to rub them with my finger so that they can grip that aluminium surface so that we can start the rest of the process. And we're just going to go very, very slowly, and it is important you take your time doing this. So then you can fold your graphic up and then very carefully, and I'm not going to remove the whole section, I'm just going to do about half of that section. I'm going to tear that off across there like that, making sure I've got all the backing paper off like this. And then bearing in mind we have cleaned our fingers, and I'm going to very, very carefully slowly work my way along in a circular motion, working outwards like this, making sure that there are no air bubbles. And if you just lay it down and try and flatten it, you will get air bubbles in there. So this is all we're going to do at this stage, is just gently work along with our fingers like so, ensuring that we don't have any air bubbles forming underneath that graphic. Okay, I'm just going to have a look at that in the light. Okay, so that's looking very good. So now we can move on to the last two sections. We can take the backing paper off of here. We can take the backing paper off of this side, like so. Again, I'm going to hold that with my fingers, working outwards in this direction. Go up to this outer edge first, and then slowly work my way along, pushing outward. Now we have got some dents on this particular case, but the graphic actually seems to be covering those dents and those marks and scratches very, very well, like so. We're going to firmly put this down in a moment. We'll move to the other corner, working outwards towards the edge of the graphic, like so. Now, if you do get an air bubble in there, the graphic, the glue that they use is actually very good, so you can unstick it and then come back and have a second pass, a second go, just to remove any bubbles that you do get trapped in there. It is actually a very, very good adhesive, and the material that UniRacing use is really very, very good because we've got this textured finish. Okay, so I've had a very good look. There's no air bubbles trapped. What we're going to do, we're going to take a clean rag, we're going to start in the center, circular motions, and we're going to work outwards all the way around So I'm very happy so far. Now we're going to move on to the two ones that are a little bit more delicate in the way that we install them. Now this graphic here, these side graphics actually have a gentle curve on the bottom. They're not perfectly flat. So when we mount it, we need to make sure that it's aligned correctly. So the way I found best to get these on is we are going to take a section off of that backing paper right in the middle, and we're going to get that mounted first. I'm gently going to peel this off, and I'm going to take something like that off of that section. Hopefully you can see that on there, just a small section on the bottom, and then I'll move the camera around. Okay, so I'm fairly happy that we've got equal distance, space left and right, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to look from above now and just gently, bear in mind we haven't taken the backing paper off. I'm just going to make sure that that looks like it's lining up, which it does, and that looks at right angles on these edges here. So I'm fairly happy to move on. So what we need to do now is take some more backing paper off of these corners. We're not going to take lots off because we need to do this slowly because there are some curves that we need to take care of. Okay, so if I peel that over, you can see I've removed that much. Now this section, this part is actually quite, you have to be very, very careful and go very slowly. So what we want to do is work outwards with our finger pressure, moving outwards and keeping some tension on this top part. So first of all I'm going to do is make sure that that bottom lip is in place like so, because we have got a little bit of a curve coming up, and then slowly working outwards like this, little bit at a time. Now you might think when you're putting this on that it's going to crease and look awful, but actually if you do it like this, it doesn't crease and you don't get bubbles. And remember, we're trying to work outwards because these edges are trying to pop upwards. We actually need to work outwards with them like this with our finger and thumb. Okay, so it looks like we've got some creases in here, but don't worry, they're going to disappear in a moment. So what we need to do next is I'm going to, in fact, I'll reposition the camera and we're going to take that last bit of backing paper off and work from the top. Gently peel it back like so, and just make sure you get the whole lot off. Have a look inside here, make sure there is no backing paper there, and then we're going to move forward. Now don't be worried, it does look like we're going to end up with creases, but in fact we are not going to have any. But it's important to take our time. We're working outwards with our thumb pressure like this. Okay, so what looked like it was going to have lots of creases in is in fact bubble free, and now we can take our cloth, work our way along, make sure working from the inside out all the way around, making sure that's firmly on there. I'll do the other side and then we'll do these two easy ones. Let's move on. So we've got our center, our two sides. The top black graphic is very easy to line up. All we need to pay attention to are these points of the compass and make sure they're in line with the pattern that's embedded within the graphic. But probably the most tricky at the very end is this little one down the bottom, because we've got several things going on. We've got our silver circle of the edge of the compass coming around here, and we've got a couple of compass points. So again, as we did earlier on, the simplest and easiest thing to do is just to take a small section of that backing paper off in the center of this graphic so that we can take our time to align it absolutely correctly. And as we showed you before, we just want to tear a small section off like this. That's about all we need, and then we can have a couple of goes at mounting this in the right place. Okay, so all I need to do now is go over all these edges of the two side graphics and the top one, working from the inside out, making sure they're firmly in place, and then I'll show you what the box looks like when we're finished. We're going to do a bit more cleaning on these plastics and then we're done. So I've made sure the graphics are firmly in place. One more thing I thought I would show you while I'm here, and the reason why I use this particular type of graphic from UniRacing is because of the material that they actually use for their graphics for their bikes and their side cases. And that is this surface. It is a very unique surface which is specially designed for UniRacing because it provides scratch resistance. Well, how much? So we'll take my screwdriver and I'll give that a right old scraping. Now, if I did that on a clear glossy graphic, I would have scratches all over my case, and that's not left any marks on there at all. And this is the same thing I find with the graphic, which is the same material from UniRacing that I've used on the transmission tunnel of the GS. It really does offer, you know, an extra level of protection so that, you know, if you do go off-road and you do get scratches and you're going through a hedge or some brambles or some bushes or some shrubs, you're not going to scratch your case, and I really like it. Anyway, let me move on. So in the video description below, you will find links to the UniRacing website where you can have a look at their range of graphics, not only for the Vario cases, but for the rest of, they've got a whole range of graphics for a whole range of motorbikes, off-road motorbikes, adventure motorbikes, street bikes, and they do have a new range of graphics coming for the R1300 GS, and that will be on their website in a couple of days. Now, also, by the time you watch this video, there will be a discount code for channel subscribers, and I'm very grateful to UniRacing to doing this because it's not something that they do very often, is give away discounts. So do have a look and see what you think. Now, I'm quite pleased with the results because these cases, as we saw earlier on, they did look pretty rough when I first got them, and I was a bit concerned I wasn't going to be able to get them looking quite so good, but I am actually now really pleased and I'm quite happy to have them on my GS. So this just shows you what you can do currently on the used market. There are lots of people that have moved up to the R1300 GSA and they can't take their Vario Panniers with them or the top box. And so this is a great time to find a bargain wherever you are in the world. There are lots of these cases available to buy. You can get them individually, you can get them as a pair, you can get them as a set. There's all different sorts of ways to buy them. And now you can see there's a very easy way to add a new lease of life. So what's coming up next is that little mini series focusing on the R1200 GS from 2010, the TU, the technical update bike. And then in probably 4 or 5 weeks time, we will have the new GS Adventure with that really clever trick gearbox to test. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. If you do like the sort of videos I create, do think about subscribing. It is free, it doesn't cost anything, it doesn't hand over any of your personal details. It's just a way of letting me know that you like the content I create, and ideally click the like button. Thank you very much for your time. See you soon. Bye-bye.